Jerusalem in 70 AD resulted in widespread slaughter, enslavement, and diaspora. This catastrophic event had significant religious and political after effects that still resonate nearly 2,000 years later. It also brought about a new covenant and a new people. Now let's go on to see what happened to the Israelites after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD and the after effects. We know that the temple was destroyed, but the synagogue and the schools of the Pharisees continued to function and flourish. The Pharisees promoted Judaism in the centuries following the diaspora, but the natural branches, the bloodline descendants of the house of Judah, what happened to them? They were scattered to the four corners of the world in fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And numerous sources confirm that many Judeans fled into various countries in Africa after the fall of Jerusalem, where they would later be taken captive and trafficked around the world. And we can see proof of that here in this journal article from the University of Michigan Library. They're quoting from a book written by John Ogilvy entitled Africa being an accurate description of the regions of Egypt, Barbary, Libya, Bildugarid, the land of Negroes, and Ethiopia. When it says the land of Negroes, it's talking about Negro land. So the article begins by talking about the 5 sorts of religions in Africa after the siege of Jerusalem. It names Christians, Israelites, Kafirs, idolaters, and Mohammedans. And it says the Christians were partly strangers and partly natives. That's simply confirming that believers of Messiah were living in Africa long before Europeans arrived to engage in human trafficking. So let's drop down to where it talks about several sorts of people arriving on the seacoast at certain seasons of the year to negotiate and trade with the English, Hollanders, French, Danes, and others, and they were making constant and frequent voyages over the whole coast of Barbary along the Mediterranean Sea unto the Straits of Gibraltar, and from thence the Cape de Verde and the Cape of Good Hope, the 2 first of whom have raised forts and fortresses in divers places on the coast of Guinea to secure and confirm their trade. What trade are they talking about here? The slave trade. And when I say slave trade, I'm mainly talking about the European slave trade, better known as the transatlantic slave trade. But it goes on to say many Yehudis also are scattered over this region, some natives boasting themselves of Abraham's seed, inhabiting both sides of the river, and some would say Niger here, but it's Niger. That's where the racists got it from. It says others are Asian strangers who fled thither either from the desolation of Jerusalem by Vespasian, or from Judea, wasted and depopulated by the Romans, Persians, Saracens, and Christians, or else such as came out of Europe whence they were banished, out of some parts of Italy in the year 1342, out of Spain in the year 1462, out of the Low Countries in 1350, out of France in 1403, out of England in 1422. These all differ in habit and are divided into several tribes, having no dominion, though both wealthy and numerous, but despised of all nations, and so abominated by the Turks that they are not admitted to be Mohammedans unless first baptized, and then no otherwise made use of than to receive their customs and gather in their taxes. So, as a result of so many Israelites being slaughtered or forced to leave Judea, it created a vacuum that led to the expansion of the new religion, namely Christianity. The Israelite leaders were few and far between during this time, and the people who took their place are known as the early church fathers. They're not talking about the apostles. They're talking about the Gentile converts. So let's look at this information from Church History 101. It says the early church fathers are the men who led the primitive and early church after the apostles. There are various listings of early church fathers. So they call them the apostolic fathers, apologists, 3rd century fathers, and these are just convenient names for groups of early church fathers. So it's supposed to give historians and students an easy way to keep up with the group. Now I'll drop down. It says that these apostolic fathers are the leaders and writers immediately following the apostles. And to add some validity, they were supposedly trained by an apostle. Now it goes on to say the 2nd century brought steady growth, talking about the growth of Christianity, but not without opponents. Early false teaching, mainly Gnostics, led the early Christian leadership to develop creeds and formulas as a way to solidify orthodox positions. Listen, the New Testament had not come fully into form. The writings of these early church fathers were held in high esteem, and it still is for a lot of Christians. So it says the main writers against Gnosticism are now known as the apologists. So if you look at the order, you see Justin Martyr was on the scene fairly early after the destruction of Jerusalem. He was there in AD 100. Then you see the others. Irenaeus in AD 135, followed by Clement of Alexandria in 150, and then Tertullian in AD 155. And I'm telling you this because I'm going to share some of the beliefs of these men, and you will see that the hatred towards our people and replacement theology started long before the writing of the New Testament. A lot of these early church fathers laid the foundation for it. So I want to spend some time talking about Justin Martyr because a lot of the men who came after him continued using his talking points. Much of what he wrote became common Christian talking points throughout the centuries. You'll even hear some of it now. So this information comes from early Christian history. It says, part of Justin's apologetics was intended to respond to common pagan criticisms of Christianity. He defended Christians' chastity and frequent asceticism, which honestly would not have been hard, since there were already Greco-Roman traditions along those lines, for example, among Pythagoreans. He defended Christians' monotheism by asserting that many pagan deities were merely poor reflections of aspects of the one true God. Listen to this. Justin further asserted that Plato had learned from Moses himself. Now come on, family. Plato learned from Moses. So he says, thus, pagan philosophy actually had come from the Christians' own God. So he came up with a clever defense against the pagans' critics who made observations that many Christian legends about Messiah resemble mythological tales that had long ago been told of pagan deities. And he responded that there were demons who formerly served the Most High, and when they left, they turned on the Most High, and because they knew what the plan of the Most High was, they came back to earth and they began to seed various cultures with similar stories in order to throw them off by the time Messiah actually arrived. So this is known as the principle of diabolical mimicry or diabolical anticipation. It says modern Christian apologists know how silly it is and often argue that Justin made no such assertion, but he did, very clearly. It's especially clear in chapter 54 of Justin's book called Justin's First Apology. Now listen, it says, in addition to addressing pagan criticisms of Christianity, Justin faced down another class of people whom he believed stood in the way of Christian supremacy. Who do you think he's talking about? The Judeans, Israelites. It says Christianity's relationship with the nation and faith it had originally emerged from had always been fraught. But Justin took the bull by the horns, and just as he'd done in the face of pagans' criticism of his faith, he went to town against the Yehudis' insolent refusal to believe in the Messiah. This effort by Justin is seen in his dialogue with Trypho. It's his account of a likely imagined debate he held with a Jew named Trypho, which is neither a Hebrew or Aramaic name, making it an odd choice for Justin unless he didn't know any better, which may have been the case. So they can't even confirm that this was an actual person that he debated with, but he used it to attack all Israelites. Why? Well, the answer may be in the last paragraph. Let's read. It says, although Justin had been born in the Levant, the district he was raised in was primarily Samaritan. And the Samaritans had little love for the Yehudis. This may have been the impetus for at least some of his hatred for the Israelites, but he also held grudges against them as a Christian. He claimed that the Yehudis had killed Messiah, and he was outraged over their rejection of Messiah. So this man is highly revered as one of the early church fathers and apologetics today. Now do you see why a lot of them respond the way they do towards Israelites? Let's go on, and this is a key point here. It says Justin laid the foundation for what would become Christianity's arguments in favor of its veracity and sanctity. Argument points that are still made today, well over 18 centuries after him. His takedown of the Yehudis and Judaism was also taken seriously and later contributed to the machinery of anti-Semitism that would build up over the succeeding centuries within Christendom. So finally, it says his works were embraced and loved by Christians who admired him for taking on opponents of the faith. What we should also know about Justin is that he was one of the most important of the Greek philosophers. He taught pagan philosophies and then became a Christian in 132 AD. Later, he was denounced to the Roman leaders as a rebel and condemned to death. So this is what makes him a martyr. Let's look at the background of Eusebius, because he's known as the father of church history. As known as the father of church history, Eusebius created extensive accounts of the first 3 centuries of Christianity. So this is the go-to man if you want to know what happened during the first 100 years of Christianity. It is said that he preserved a wealth of early documentation that would have otherwise been lost. His exhaustive research and painstaking concern for identifying original sources were virtually unprecedented among ancient historians. Without the work of Eusebius, our knowledge of the earliest days of Christianity would be extremely limited, including that of the persecution of the church and the reign of Constantine. Now let's go on. Eusebius's greatest contribution is Historia Ecclesiastica, which is church history, an extensive history of the Christian church from the time of the apostles until about AD 323, just before the Council of Nicaea. So this was the go-to man if you wanted to know about Christian history. Not only that, it says Eusebius's legacy to the church stretched beyond historical record keeping. He played a major role in the theological controversies and ecclesiastical politics of his day as the leading spiritual advisor to Constantine. Eusebius helped form the orthodox understanding of the relationship between church and state, a closely intertwined bond, which became the Constantinian concept of a Christian empire. How objective was he going to be, family? He was the spiritual advisor to Constantine. It goes on to say Eusebius was influential in reaching a compromise at the Council of Nicaea in AD 325, mediating the debate between the Arians and the Orthodox position regarding the nature of Christ. Prior to the Council of Nicaea, the church had temporarily excommunicated Eusebius because of his support of Arian Christology. But at the Council of Nicaea, Eusebius took a middle stand in the Arian controversy and affirmed the council's creed. Now for Origen. He was called the man of steel. It says he was a brilliant Bible scholar, later condemned as a heretic. He was born about 185 AD near Alexandria, Egypt, in 202 AD. His father was beheaded as a Christian martyr. The young Origen wanted to be a martyr too, but his mother kept him from going out by hiding his clothes. So he was an early church father so zealous he was tortured for his faith, but so controversial he was declared a heretic centuries after his death because of some of his unorthodox beliefs. Interesting. Now we're going to look at some information from Bible.org. And this information is regarding the eschatology of the early church fathers. This section is talking about this supposed debate that Justin had with Trypho. Trypho was challenging him on his statements about Israel being cut off and not being able to inherit anything. This is how Justin responded. He says, "I do not say so, but those who have persecuted and do persecute Christ, if they do not repent, shall not inherit anything on the holy mountain. But the Gentiles, who have believed on him and have repented of the sins which they have committed, they shall receive the inheritance along with the patriarchs and the prophets and the just men who are descended from Jacob, even although they neither keep the Sabbath nor are circumcised, nor observe the feasts. Assuredly, they shall receive the holy inheritance of the Most High." So who are these just men that descended from Jacob who do not keep the commandments or honor the Sabbath? And this is how Trypho responded to him. He asked, "What then? Are you Israel? And speaks he such things of you, as therefore from one man Jacob, who was surnamed Israel, all your nation has been called Jacob and Israel. So we from Christ, who begat us unto the Most High, like Jacob and Israel and Judah and Joseph and David, are called and are the true sons of the Most High, and keep the commandments of Christ. So someone named Saucy offers a critique of what Justin wrote. And it says, according to Saucy, Justin Martyr's statements were the capstone of a developing tendency in the church to appropriate to itself the attributes and prerogatives that formerly belonged to historical Israel. So Saucy states, with Justin's statement, the developing theology of replacement was complete. There was no longer any place for historical Israel in salvation history. The prophecies addressed to this people henceforth belonged to the church. Now the question is being asked, why did the early church fathers so quickly abandon the biblical distinction between Israel and the church? So Saucy notes 4 factors. The first was the developing antagonism between the Yehudis and the early Christians. So it says the early strife revealed in the apostolic period was exacerbated by the failure of Christians to support the Yehudis when they revolted against the Roman authorities in AD 66 through AD 70. The Christians chose instead to flee Jerusalem for the safety of Pella across the Jordan in Decapolis. So it says the schism was again deepened by the Yehudi proclamation at the Council of Jamnia in AD 90, that all who departed from the standard faith that the Israelites had were cursed. Now it says the second factor that influenced the thinking of the Christians in terms of how they viewed Israel was the twofold destruction of Jerusalem. The Christians saw these defeats as evidence that the Most High was vindicating Christianity and he was displeased with Israel. And we certainly know that he was. So it goes on to say the early Christians abandoned any hope for the restoration of the nation of Israel. And this is a good place to read this scripture right here from Deuteronomy 32:21, when the Most High said, because Israel provoked him to jealousy by worshiping idols, he says, I will provoke them to jealousy by those who are not a nation. I will move them to anger by a foolish nation. Let's go on. So Circe now lists the third and fourth factors. The third is, according to Gentiles, there was a refusal of the Israelites to accept Messiah. So it says, as time passed, the church realized that the Israelites were not going to change their mind about that. So they began to see them less as converts to the gospel and more as enemies of the gospel. But how in the world could all of the Israelites be enemies of the gospel when the Gentiles actually heard the gospel from the disciples and apostles? So the fourth rationale involved the increasingly Gentile composition of the church. So what happened is that there were less and less Judeans because many of them were being slaughtered and others were forced to run into other countries. This created a vacuum and opened the door for the Gentiles to take over. But it says the church began to be dominated by people without Israelite roots, the hardening of the Judeans' hearts, and the waning hope for their conversion. So this made it easier for the increasingly Gentile church to polemicize against Judaism and to seek a replacement. So the basic premise of the early church fathers was that the Most High had permanently cut off the nation of Israel as his people. And what did that lead to? And this is one you hear all the time, particularly from those who call themselves messianics. It led to them saying the faithful of the church age became the new Israel of God. They are the new Israel of God. So they, along with the patriarchs and saints of previous ages, would inherit the promises given to national Israel, and these promises would be fulfilled in the millennial kingdom. Now let's see what some of these men had to say about us. This is coming from a book called Building on the Ruins of the Temple, and this is by Moore Seebeck. So the book is talking about the period after 70 AD, and you're going to see how the writings of these men, these so-called church fathers, provided the framework for what would come next, which is the new covenant with the Gentiles. So the purpose for this book is to demonstrate the legitimacy of Gentile Christianity. It says, this legitimacy rests on two related beliefs: that Christians are Yah's chosen people, and that they have supplanted the Israelites in the covenant with Yah. A prominent aspect of their legitimacy and a boundary marker for the religious community is the claim that they alone, Christians, they are the only ones who properly interpret the Hebrew Bible. So let's dig into this. It says here that the authors studied here sought zealously, either in the case of the Israelites, to offer a defense of their continuing status as the people of Yah to fellow Israelites, or in the case of Christians, to offer a defense of their replacement of Israelites as the new people of Yah to fellow Christians. Relatedly, in the case of Christians, they also include bitter and direct polemical attacks against Israelites. These overarching defenses include claims of undeniably major significance to Israelites and Christians alike, such as claims to divine election, or to proper understanding of biblical law, or that one's community is holy or good. So the author begins with a quote from Justin Martyr. He says, therefore Justin says, we believe the scriptures, but you, speaking about the Israelites, though you read them, do not catch the spirit that is in them. The Israelites, because of their sinfulness and obtuseness, were reproached with unfitness for the inheritance of the biblical promises. So the author says, in his supersessionist theory, speaking about Justin Martyr, he's saying the Israelites were rejected by the Most High, and their inheritance was transferred to the more faithful Gentiles. So the author says this last step is key, and it is these two parallel arguments, the rejection of the Israelites and the call of the Gentiles, that are at the center of the dial. These are strong claims, and they inevitably clash with Trypho's claims, for they fundamentally undercut the self-identity of the Israelites. So it says, though the so-called partings of the ways between Judaism and Christianity took centuries and varied between locations, Justin clearly views Judaism and Christianity as separate religions. Both he and Trypho use the term Christian, listen, to refer to Gentile believers as members of a discrete an independent religious group. Neither includes Israelites when using this term. For Justin, to be a Christian is to be a Gentile. Let me say that again. According to Justin Martyr, this early church father, he says to be a Christian is to be a Gentile. He views the biblical covenant with the Most High in zero-sum terms, claiming it entirely for Christians, by which he means those who are not Israelites. It cannot be shared. Let's go on. And please understand, family, that these men are the influencers of which letters would be included in the New Testament later. Based on what I've covered thus far, you should be able to understand why most of the letters were written by Paul. So it says, admittedly, there is some tension in this claim that Justin envisages a complete transfer of the covenant from Israelites to Gentiles. For the idea that believing Gentiles and believing Israelites, however few, might together form one community is not entirely absent. So in a revealing admission, Justin says this to Trypho, the Israelite he's speaking to, that there remains a possibility that some of your nation, i.e. Israelites, would be found children of Abraham, just a few, and few would even be counted in the group that belonged to Messiah. Justin goes on to say, this is, however, remote and highly unlikely, for a vast multitude in your Israelite nation is imbibing doctrines of bitterness and godlessness, spurning the word of the Most High. So now the author adds his comments by saying, hopeful statements about a mixed community are therefore rare indeed. This totalizing denunciation represents the dominant view that the Israelites have been entirely faithless, with just a few exceptions, and these possibly limited to the past. Therefore, it is their fate to be replaced by Gentiles in the covenant with the Most High. So the author says, as Justin tells it, the emergence of Christianity as an independent religious tradition had practical implications. For example, Christians lost the privileges afforded to the Israelites as members of an ancient and mostly respected religion, such as exemptions from pagan rituals. Equally, if not more serious, were the implications for Christian identity. The separation from Judaism meant that Justin, if he wants to claim the biblical promises and covenant with the Most High for the Christians rather than the Israelites, needs to demonstrate why such a remarkable transfer took place. So it talks about the claim to the biblical, or the claim to the Bible, and this is what Gentiles now lay claim to, that it's their book. The claim to the Bible necessitated a reinterpretation of the commandments because Gentile Christians no longer followed the prominent Israelite rituals. So this reinterpretation relied on both proofs from prophecy and proofs from history. So the author is now going to give some examples of how Justin Martyr is proving that the biblical promises and covenant now belong to Gentiles and not Israelites. Now listen, Justin argues that the former covenant between the Most High and Israel, sealed with the blood of that physical circumcision, is now void. He says the Most High had always intended to establish another covenant sealed with the blood of salvation in Christ for Gentile believers. Though the Most High had a covenant with Israel, they have grievously sinned, and he has now established a new covenant with the Gentiles. This is why they do not ascribe to it being a renewed covenant. So in this new covenant, unlike the covenant that existed before the coming of Messiah, the sons of Abraham, i.e. the Israelites, no longer have any advantages over the Gentiles, and obedience to the law is not necessary. You know why? Because according to him, the first covenant is nullified. So according to Justin, the destruction in AD 70 was part of the final punishment of sinful Israel, and has as its primary implication the call of a new people. And Justin cites verses in these same 3 chapters of the Dial that make just this point. So he talks about verses in Isaiah that says, I was manifest to them that sought me not. I was found of them that asked not for me. So Justin applies this to the Gentile Christians who were formerly cut off from Yah, but now called to take the place of Israel. Justin even adds his own short phrase to the end of a passage in Isaiah that describes the coming redemption in terms favorable to the Gentiles. So the passage in Isaiah originally read, And now, O house of Jacob, come, and let us walk in the light of the Most High, to which Justin immediately adds, Come all nations, thereby appropriating the title House of Jacob for the Gentile Christians and foreshadowing their covenant with the Most High. So this exemplifies the transfer of divine favor from non-Christian Israelites to Gentile Christians that was finally confirmed at the destruction. It says, Justin defends his Christian claim to the covenant and denies it to Israelites, and finds evidence for this in the prophets for a knowledge of the Israelites' suffering. Now let's see what Origen has to say. So it says the separation of Christianity from Judaism was one of the many topics that the highly influential 3rd century Christian theologian and biblical interpreter Origen took up with his characteristic subtlety and insight. Above all, in his major work, which was called Contra Celsum, the focus of this chapter. It says, while scholars know that this separation was not necessarily accepted by all Israelites and Christians, even by the 3rd or 4th centuries, and varied depending on place and time, Origen, like Justin, believed that there had been a clear break between the 2 religious communities. In his mind, this rupture was important to the self-definition of the Christian community as a new thing, separate from and opposed to Judaism. At the same time, he does not deny the Israelite roots of Christianity, and much of his argument in Cells, or this book that he wrote, is devoted to proving both continuity and discontinuity with Judaism. Because of his desire to show that the antiquity and respectability of Christianity reflects its ancient Jewish roots, it is very important for Origen to walk the fine line between laying claim to some of the traditions of Judaism that remain relative to Gentile Christianity, while also unambiguously differentiating between what he sees as 2 distinct religions. So the author says, as I will demonstrate, he, talking about Origen, repeatedly refers to the event, talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, to support his foundational theological claim that the Israelites were rejected from the covenant and their places taken by Gentile Christians. Origen draws upon it to convince readers of the Most High's continuing involvement in the world, and in particular, of the Most High's will for the disparate fates of the Israelites and the Christians as revealed in their actual historical experiences. So this chapter, the author is now going to talk about Origen's use of the destruction as proof from history, and especially to argue for the legitimacy of Gentile Christianity and to undermine competing Israelite claims. So Origen assesses the Israelites' guilt comparatively in order to prove that the evil of the crucifixion was unequaled, and thereby to justify the severity of the destruction, again talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. So in his longer view of the history of the Israelites, they had never lived completely upright lives. But when Messiah came, their wickedness reached its apex. The whole nation was caught up in sin. The whole nation, you all. Worse than ever before, and they committed their greatest sin at the crucifixion. Origen says this event is without precedent and without equal, and thereby situates it into a larger historical pattern of misbehavior. So just forget about the apostles, the disciples, the thousands that followed Messiah. So according to Origen, prior to 70 CE, the ancient Israelite nation, before they insulted and acted insolently toward the Most High by killing Messiah, were in a unique relationship with the Most High. However, after the crucifixion, the Most High forsook them on account of their great wickedness and punished them with destruction and unending exile. So you have to completely ignore all of those biblical prophecies in the Old Testament to say that. So it says sometimes the Israelites' fate is explained as divine vengeance, as when Messiah looks into the future and knows and interestingly bemoans the ominous fate of the Israelites. So Origen writes, the Savior saw what disasters would befall the people and Jerusalem to avenge the acts which the Israelites had dared to commit against him. In discussing the covenantal relationship between the Most High and the Israelites, Origen writes, nothing is permanent. What happened to everlasting covenant? It says, though they were for a while protected by divine power, the Israelites jeopardized this solicitude by opposing Messiah, and the Most High arranged it so that under the Romans they were entirely abandoned. The terrible punishment suffered by no other people of having been banished from their own capital city and the native place of their ancestral worship is on account of their disbelief in Messiah and all their other insults to him. Even though the actual destruction happened through the Romans, for it was at their hands that the Israelites suffered and the temple and city were destroyed, all that occurred conformed to the will of the Most High. Now, according to Origen, the special status that the Israelites had was not eternal, because he said the covenant was not unbreakable, because the Israelites were expected to remain obedient to the law, and they risked punishment for transgression, which is true. But he says the covenant might thereby be changed and even abrogated, and a new people elected in the place of the Israelites. And he said this actually occurred in 70 CE. For the destruction was the ultimate punishment for the ultimate sin, which was the killing of Messiah. And family, that is why they need it to be a new covenant. When it's a renewed covenant, the argument fails, because with a renewed covenant, it's with the original people, the people you made it with in the first place. So the author said, this argument by Origen is based on his conception about what the nature of the Israelite covenant is, which means he basically didn't understand it. So the author is now going to push back against his argument. And he says, before the first century, the Israelites, as the Most High's chosen people, were in a covenantal relationship. Punishment and reward were meted out. But the covenant itself was never canceled because of the Israelites' disobedience. As Origen describes it, in the past, although the Israelites committed many sins, they did not suffer for them any comparable calamities to those they would suffer after killing Messiah. They were severely chastened by the Most High, and sometimes they did seem to have been deserted on account of their sins. But the author is saying, nevertheless, they were under the Most High's care and returned to resume their own property and to perform the customary ritual without hindrance. So the author says the Most High remained faithful to the people, and their experiences prove this. He says this is all according to the terms of the covenant. Now we're going to see what Eusebius had to say. And the author is basically telling us that Eusebius utilizes this disastrous historical event in order to present a theological apologetic of divine rejection of Judaism and of the religious legitimacy of Gentile Christianity. So the author says, in this regard, some of his ideas parallel those of Justin and Origen. He too links the Israelites' role in the crucifixion to the destruction and applies the historical event to his defense of central features of Gentile Christian identity, such as the possession of the formerly Israelite covenant, the abolition of the demands of the law, and the Gentile mission. However, perhaps owing to his general historical orientation and later date, he employs a more sophisticated theological model to explain the relationship between Judaism and Christianity, and in particular, to affirm both continuity and discontinuity between past biblical Israel and present Gentile Christianity. The author says, compared to Origen and Justin, Eusebius's attitude toward Jerusalem was especially negative. He was hostile to any attachments whatsoever to the city, assigning it no abiding religious significance. He even mocked it as simply a corner of the earth. He said Christianity might have begun there, but it had long ago spread throughout the empire. So he castigated continued veneration of the city. However, he placed more significance on the new city refounded by Hadrian that they named Aelia Capitolina in the 2nd century. So it tells us that Eusebius visited Jerusalem, and he said he saw the Temple Mount, and he would later write that as he saw it, what happened there was of divine wrath against the Israelites and of the divine election of Gentile Christians in their place. Like Justin and Origen, Eusebius had a very pessimistic attitude about the prospects for the Israelites' conversions. He would later admit that most Israelites from the time of Messiah onward, so we're talking about including the apostles and the disciples, have stubbornly rejected Christianity and clung ardently to their religious traditions. He said they do not seem to have budged from their non-Christian beliefs, nor does Eusebius have much hope that they will do so. So the author says, while our historical sources are often fragmentary, especially from the 2nd century forward, we know of multiple revolts and clashes between Israelites and Gentiles during this time. It says, in the land of Israel, Israelites remained impoverished and weak subjects of a foreign power in territory they considered their own. This depressed condition appeared likely to last, especially as hopes for a rebuilt temple and a renewal of sovereignty in the land waned with the passage of time. At the same time, Christian communities grew, sometimes leading to religious conflicts and controversies with Israelites. So the author says, as we have already seen, Gentile Christians were eagerly championing their identity as the new people of the Most High and attacking fundamental features of Israelite identity, such as observance of the law and their covenant with the Most High. According to those so-called church fathers, they have a better understanding of the scriptures than the Israelites, yet they are guilty of what Paul warned them against. Don't boast against the branches. Let's read it. Paul said, if the first fruit is holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. If the root is holy, so are the branches. And if some of the branches were cut off or broken off, it didn't say all. Some of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them, and with them became a partaker of the root and fatness of the olive tree. Do not boast against the branches. But if you do boast, remember that you do not support the root, but the root supports you. What else did he say? And these verses right here will dispel all of the lies they wrote then and continue to believe now. Let's look at verses 25 through 32. And as I'm reading it, I want you to remember that the one they esteem above all of the other apostles said this. He says, for I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion. And that explains it right there for those church fathers. Wise in their own opinion. He says blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And so all Israel will be saved, as it is written. The deliverer will come out of Zion, and he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Let's pause right there. This is a part of the covenant for Yah to take away the sins of Israel. Listen to it again. For this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. So Paul says concerning the gospel, they are enemies for your sake, but concerning the election, they are beloved for the sake of the fathers. For the gifts and calling of Yah are irrevocable. For as you were once disobedient to Yah, yet have now obtained mercy through their disobedience, even so These also have now been disobedient, that through the mercy shown you, they also may obtain mercy. For Yah has committed them all to disobedience, that he might have mercy on all. Why do we need to know this information, family? Because some of the events that led up to the destruction of Jerusalem were orchestrated by others because of envy. Envy was being stirred up in Gentiles. Not to mention that certain nations came together and entered into an agreement to cut us off from being a nation. That's not to say that it was not in Yah's divine plan because of our sin. The prophecies that were told to us had to happen. They had to be fulfilled. Particularly the one in Luke 21 about us being taken captive and scattered into all nations. What did Messiah say would happen after that? It would be the time of the Gentiles. This information is showing how they got their foot in the door and then took over. They were able to get their hands on our books and take control of the message. But here's the thing. Because of all of the lies of the Gentiles, that began long ago, by the way, it fanned the flame of hatred that led to a replacement doctrine and reduced the people of the Most High to, in their words, perpetual slaves. According to them, it is because Israel sinned. So we can ask the question, does the same rule apply to Gentiles when they sin? So let's wrap up with this passage from Exodus 6:6-9. Moses is told to speak to the children of Israel and say, I am the Most High. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will rescue you from their bondage, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. I will take you as my people. But the Gentiles say, oh no, we are now the people, and he is our God. But this promise was made to Israel. He says, then you shall know that I am the Most High, Yah, who brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will bring you into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you as a heritage. The Most High promised to bring them into the land that he swore to give to their forefathers. This belongs to Israel as a heritage. This same promise belongs to us today. Why? Because the land was given to us by the owner of heaven and earth. But listen to verse 9. So Moses spoke thus to the children of Israel, but they did not heed Moses. They didn't listen to him. Why? Because of anguish of spirit and cruel bondage. They were broken, family. They were broken. That's the state that we're in as a people. A lot of our people cannot bring themselves to believe that we are the true people of the book and that we have a heritage. They believe that all hope is lost. Why? Because of anguish of spirit and the lingering results of the cruel bondage. We're talking about a broken people. We need the healing balm of Gilead, family. And that day will come. If this message has been a blessing to you, please hit the like and share it. You're also welcome to subscribe if you have not already done so. We normally upload the messages on Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Join me next time.